Have you ever watched someone destroy their own career with a single reply all? This is the story of how a brilliant financial strategist was humiliated and stripped from the biggest project of her life, and how it took exactly 24 minutes to turn her tormentor's victory lap into a $64 million obituary. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't plotted in shadows or whispered in corridors. Sometimes it's served in 12-point calibri. CCD to everyone who matters. My name is Emily Hart, and at 35, I'd built my reputation on one simple principle: numbers don't lie, but people do. As a senior risk analyst at Graveson & Locke's Denver office, I'd spent the last 8 years transforming raw data into strategic gold, the kind that saved companies millions before they even knew they were bleeding. The mahogany walls of our 42nd floor office had witnessed my rise from junior analyst to the firm's go-to specialist for supply chain vulnerabilities. My corner desk, with its view of the Rocky Mountains, was earned through countless nights dissecting spreadsheets that would make most people's eyes glaze over. But to me, those cells and formulas were a language, one that spoke of hidden dangers and unseen opportunities. That September morning started like any other. Coffee at 6:30, emails at 6:45, and by 7:00, I was deep in the final review of my magnum opus, a comprehensive risk assessment for Apex Dynamics, our largest client. The contract was worth $64 million to the firm, and I'd spent 3 months building what I knew was bulletproof analysis. Every supply chain weakness, every vendor dependency, every geopolitical tremor that could impact their operations, I'd mapped it all. The report was 340 pages of meticulously researched warnings and recommendations. I'd identified critical vulnerabilities, potential port strikes in Peru that could cripple their copper supply, rare earth material shortages in Chile that nobody else was tracking, and most importantly, their dangerous over-reliance on a single supplier in Poland whose financial statements showed troubling inconsistencies. My team, 6 brilliant analysts who'd worked themselves to exhaustion alongside me, had triple-checked every projection. Sarah, my lead researcher, had even learned basic Polish to verify supplier documentation. Marcus had built predictive models that could forecast disruption probabilities down to the week. This wasn't just a report, it was a fortress of foresight that could protect Apex from catastrophic losses. I remember standing by the window that morning, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold, feeling that particular satisfaction that comes from knowing you've created something exceptional. The presentation to leadership was scheduled for 10:00 a.m. After that, we'd present to Apex's board the following week, and I'd finally get the recognition that had been dancing just out of reach for years. Maybe even make partner. The email announcement had arrived the previous Friday. A new CFO was joining the leadership meeting. Victor Hale. Poached from some boutique investment fund in New York. I'd Googled him, of course. Wharton MBA, a few years at Goldman, then a string of increasingly smaller firms. The trajectory told a story, though not the one his polished LinkedIn profile suggested. As I gathered my presentation materials, I caught my reflection in the black screen of my monitor. Professional blazer, subtle makeup, hair pulled back in what my mother called my battle bun. I looked ready, I felt ready. If someone had told me that in 3 hours, I'd be publicly humiliated and demoted to a PowerPoint formatter, I would have laughed. If they'd said that same humiliation would become the fuse for the most spectacular corporate self-immolation I'd ever witness, I might have paid attention. But that morning, walking toward conference room A with my laptop and my 3 months of work, I only knew one thing. I was about to deliver the best presentation of my career. I had no idea I was also walking into an ambush. Conference room A was already packed when I arrived. The entire C-suite occupied the leather chairs around the polished table, their faces expectant. I'd presented to this group before, but today felt different. There was a tension in the air, like the atmospheric pressure drop before a storm. Victor Hale sat at the far end, directly opposite CEO Margaret Thornton. Even seated, he dominated his space, broad shoulders in a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Platinum Rolex catching the light every time he gestured. His smile was all teeth, no warmth. Investment banker smile. We called it the kind that calculated your worth while shaking your hand. I was halfway through my executive summary, explaining the critical risks in their Peru operations, when he struck. Excuse me. Victor's voice cut through my explanation like a blade through silk. Emily, is it? He knew my name. We'd been introduced 20 minutes earlier. Yes, Mr. Hale. This is all very thorough. He drew out the word like it tasted bad. But aren't we supposed to be advisors who enable growth? This reads like a horror novel written by an Excel spreadsheet. Nervous laughter rippled through the room. I kept my expression neutral, though my grip on the presenter remote tightened. Risk assessment is about identifying potential. Potential problems, yes, I heard. He leaned back, fingers steepled. But where's the optimism? Where's the vision? Apex hired us to help them expand, not to tell them ghost stories about what might go wrong. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. The port strike in Peru isn't a ghost story. The unions have already filed. Might happen, could happen, possibly might, maybe occur. He waved his hand dismissively, his Rolex glinting like a weapon. Emily, I appreciate your enthusiasm for catastrophe. But we need to focus on growth opportunities, not every little thing that could theoretically go sideways. He stood, walking around the table with the practiced swagger of someone who'd perfected the art of commandeering rooms. Here's what we're going to do. I'll handle the Apex presentation personally. I've worked with companies 10 times their size. No offense to your local experience, of course. Local experience, as if Denver was some backwater outpost. But the analysis I started will be incorporated, naturally. The highlights, anyway. The growth positive elements. He paused behind my chair, and I could smell his cologne, something expensive and aggressive. You can help with the deck, make it visual, you know? Less doom and gloom, more charts that go up and to the right. You're good with PowerPoint, I assume? The question hung in the air like a slap waiting to land. Around the table, my colleagues shifted uncomfortably. Sarah's face had gone pale. Marcus was staring at his notepad like it held the secrets of the universe. Margaret Thornton cleared her throat. Victor, Emily has been leading this account. And she's done adequate preliminary work. Victor interrupted smoothly. But Apex needs polish. They need someone who speaks their language. Someone who's closed deals in New York, not just... He gestured vaguely at my stack of reports. Cataloged everything that could go wrong in the world. He returned to his seat, that investment banker smile spreading wider. Emily, I'll need those raw files by end of day. Just the data, no need for all the... He waved his hand again. Interpretation. I'll craft the narrative myself. Something forward-looking, visionary. You want 3 months of analysis reduced to raw data? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Exactly. See, you do understand. And next week, you'll be there. Of course. Someone needs to run the slides while I present. Make sure you wear something professional. His eyes flicked over my blazer with an expression that suggested it didn't quite meet his standards. The room was silent. Nobody defended me. Nobody pushed back. Margaret looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. The politics were clear. Victor had been brought in at a level that made him untouchable, at least for now. I gathered my materials slowly, deliberately, maintaining eye contact with him the entire time. Of course, Mr. Hale, I'll get you everything you need. Excellent, I knew you were a team player. He was already pulling out his phone, dismissing me before I'd even left the room. Oh, and Emily? Let's trim this down to maybe 30 slides. Nobody wants to sit through a novel. Walking back to my desk, I heard him through the closing door. Now, let's talk about real strategy. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing my humiliation. But beneath the anger, beneath the shock of being so thoroughly diminished, something else was stirring. Victor Hale had just made 2 critical mistakes. He'd humiliated me publicly, ensuring I had nothing left to lose. and he'd asked for all my raw data. He wanted the files without interpretation, without context. I'd give him exactly what he asked for. I sat at my desk for exactly 3 minutes, letting the rage crystallize into something more useful. Around me, the office buzzed with the usual morning energy. But I could feel the sideways glances, the careful distance my colleagues maintained. News of my demotion had already spread through the 42nd floor like blood in water. Sarah approached first, tentative as a deer. "Emily, that was fine." I cut her off, pulling up my email. "It's fine." But my fingers were already typing a different story. To Margot Ellis, CFO, Apex Dynamics. Subject, Transition Update, Apex Risk Assessment. Dear Margot, I wanted to inform you of an organizational change regarding next week's presentation. Victor Hale, our new CFO, will be presenting the strategic recommendations personally. I'll be attending in a support capacity. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you need any clarification on the preliminary analysis I've shared over the past months. Best regards, Emily. The email was professionally neutral, containing nothing Victor could object to if he saw it. But Margot and I went back 6 years, to when she'd been my mentor at Deloitte before her move to Apex. She taught me to read between lines, to hear what wasn't being said. She'd understand this message perfectly. Something was wrong. Her response came 17 minutes later. Emily. Noted. I look forward to Mr. Hale's insights. We'll expect the same level of thoroughness we've come to rely on. M. That last line was pure Margot, a shot across the bow disguised as professional courtesy. She'd be watching Victor like a hawk watches a mouse. Marcus wheeled his chair over, pretending to discuss quarterly projections while actually whispering, "What do you need?" "Nothing," I said, loud enough for anyone listening. Then, quieter, "Make sure everyone keeps copies of their original work, date-stamped." He nodded, understanding immediately. In our world, documentation was ammunition. The rest of the day, I played the part of the defeated subordinate perfectly. I compiled the raw data Victor wanted, all 64 gigabytes of it, every spreadsheet, every dataset, every supporting document. But I stripped out what he'd dismissed as interpretation, the analytical frameworks, the correlation matrices, the contextualization that made the data meaningful. It was like handing someone the ingredients for a souffle without mentioning you need to separate the eggs. At 4:47 p.m., I sent Victor the link to the shared drive. As requested, my email read, "All raw data from the Apex Risk Assessment, no interpretation included." He replied within minutes, "Perfect. This is exactly the foundation I need." Foundation. He had no idea he was building on quicksand. That evening, as the office emptied, I stopped by my team's desks one by one. Not to complain or conspire, that would be traceable, actionable. Instead, I simply reminded them about professional standards. Whatever happens with the Apex presentation, I told each of them, make sure your original work is properly attributed in your portfolios. You earned that. They understood. In corporate warfare, plausible deniability is armor. The weekend passed in careful preparation. I created my own version of the presentation, the one I would have given, 30 slides, as Victor requested, but built with the precision of a Swiss watch. Every risk properly weighted. Every opportunity balanced against its potential downside. I saved it to my personal drive, date-stamped and digitally signed. Sunday evening. Victor sent an email to the entire leadership team and the Apex board. Looking forward to unveiling our visionary growth strategy for Apex tomorrow. This represents a new paradigm in strategic consulting, moving beyond fear-based limitations to embrace transformative opportunities. Fear-based limitations. He meant my 3 months of work. I read it while soaking in my bathtub. Laptop balanced on the caddy, wine glass in hand. Another email appeared, this one from Margot to the same distribution list. We're eager to see this new paradigm. As always, we'll have specific questions about risk mitigation, particularly regarding our South American operations and European supplier dependencies. I smiled for the first time since Friday. Margot was telegraphing her punches, and Victor was too arrogant to see them coming. That night, I selected my outfit for Monday with unusual care. Not the gray suit Victor would expect from his newly designated slide clicker. Instead, I chose my best piece, a black Armani suit I'd bought to celebrate my first six-figure bonus. The one that made me look like I could buy and sell junior CFOs before breakfast. If I was going to watch Victor Hale destroy himself, I was going to look spectacular doing it. The last thing I did before bed was check the shared drive. Victor had accessed the files 17 times over the weekend. Each time, he'd downloaded raw data without any of the analytical tools needed to understand it. He was trying to build a presentation about risk without understanding what the risks actually were. Tomorrow, he would stand in front of Margot Ellis and 14 other executives, holding a gun he'd loaded himself, safety off, pointed directly at his own foot. All I had to do was stand back and watch him pull the trigger. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline Denver sunshine that made the mountains look close enough to touch. I arrived at the office at 7 a.m. sharp, finding Victor already in conference room A, surrounded by printouts and 3 empty Starbucks cups. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, tie loosened, the image of a dedicated executive burning the midnight oil. "Emily!" He looked up with that investment banker smile, though dark circles under his eyes betrayed his weekend struggle. "Just putting the finishing touches on our masterpiece. The data you provided was comprehensive. Code 4, incomprehensible without context." "I'm glad it was helpful," I replied, setting down my laptop bag. "Would you like me to review the risk sections?" "No need." He waved dismissively at his screen. "I've simplified everything into growth sectors. Much cleaner narrative. Oh, and I need you to print 40 copies of the handouts. Color, obviously. Bound, if possible." "Of course." I glanced at his screen as I passed. Slide 12 caught my eye, a projection chart showing explosive growth in South American operations with no mention of the port strike risks. Slide 18 celebrated their strategic partnership with the Polish supplier without noting the financial irregularities I'd flagged. He'd built a house of cards in PowerPoint form. At 8:30, Margaret Thornton stopped by. "Victor, Emily, ready for the Apex meeting?" "Never been more prepared," Victor assured her, that Rolex catching the light as he gestured confidently. "This will revolutionize how they think about expansion." Margaret's eyes found mine briefly. I kept my expression neutral, professional. She knew my work. She'd praised it just last quarter. But she'd also let Victor steamroll me without intervention. Politics over performance, the oldest corporate story ever told. The drive to Apex Dynamics took 30 minutes. Victor spent it on his phone, barking at someone about his New York apartment while I sat silently in the back of the town car. The bound presentations stacked beside me like expensive fiction. Apex's headquarters occupied a glass tower in the Denver Tech Center, all sharp angles and reflected sky. The executive conference room on the 20th floor was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a table that could seat 30, and a view that stretched to the Continental Divide. Margot Ellis sat at the head of that table like a queen holding court. At 53, she commanded the kind of respect that made grown executives check their phones nervously when she entered a room. Her silver hair was pulled back severely. Her suit cost more than my car. And her expression as we entered was pleasantly neutral, the most dangerous expression she possessed. "Victor," she said, extending her hand. "I've heard so much about you. All of it quite interesting." If Victor caught the undertone, he didn't show it. "Ms. Ellis, the pleasure is mine. Ready to transform Apex's trajectory?" "I'm ready to hear how you plan to do that while managing our operational risks," she replied smoothly, "particularly given the current volatility in our supply chains." The other board members were filing in, 14 executives who collectively controlled a company worth $2.8 billion ZARs. I recognized most from my research: James Novak, the COO, who'd survived 3 CEOs, Linda Torres, the chief supply chain officer whose questions could dissect a presentation like a scalpel? Robert Kim, the head of international operations who'd built Apex's South American presence from nothing. Victor launched into his presentation with the confidence of someone who'd never met a room he couldn't charm. His slides were beautiful, gradient backgrounds, animated transitions, charts that soared upward like rockets. Apex Dynamics stands at the threshold of unprecedented growth, he declared, clicking to his first slide. Your current projections are frankly conservative. We see potential for 340% expansion in the next 18 months. Based on what assumptions? Margot's question came before he could advance to slide 2. Market dynamics, emerging opportunities, the fundamental strength of your operations. Victor's answer was smoke dressed as substance. Specific assumptions, Mr. Hale. Margot's tone could have frozen mercury. He clicked forward quickly, too quickly. The slide wasn't ready for scrutiny, just pretty numbers without foundation. We're seeing gaps in the South American market that Apex is uniquely positioned to fill. Through our Peru operations? This from Linda Torres. The ones dependent on Puerto Callao? Exactly. Victor seized on what he thought was agreement. Your Peru infrastructure is a launching pad. Linda exchanged a glance with Margot. A launching pad currently threatened by a port workers' strike that could begin in 6 weeks. The silence that followed was exquisite. Victor's smile flickered like a candle in wind. I'm sure that's manageable, he said, clicking to the next slide with slightly less confidence, but the blood was in the water now. And Margot's board members were sharks who'd scented weakness. Tell us about our Polish supplier relationship, Robert Kim said mildly. Slide 18 mentions doubling our reliance on them. Victor brightened, back on prepared ground. Kowalski Industries, yes, excellent pricing, strategic European position. And their recent financial audit, Margot interrupted. Victor's hand hesitated over his presenter remote. The financials looked solid. Which financials? Margot pulled out a folder, my folder. I realized, the one I'd sent her months ago. The ones showing 3 years of declining revenue? Or the ones indicating they've been factoring their receivables at increasing rates? The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victor was sweating now. His Tom Ford suit, no armor against actual knowledge. I'll need to review those specific details, he managed. Perhaps Emily can help, Margot suggested, her eyes finding mine. Emily, you spent 3 months analyzing these risks, didn't you? Every head in the room turned to me. Victor's face was a study in dawning realization. I did, I said simply. Would you like me to clarify any of the risk factors? That won't be necessary, Victor said quickly, too quickly. We're focusing on opportunities, not obstacles. Opportunities without risk assessment aren't opportunities, Margot said quietly. They're gambles. And we don't gamble with $64 million contracts. The rest of the presentation unraveled like a cheap sweater. Every slide met questions Victor couldn't answer. Every projection faced scrutiny he couldn't defend. By slide 25, he'd stopped pretending to smile. By slide 30, he was done. The presentation limped to its conclusion at 11:47 a.m. Victor's final slide, Apex Dynamics Unlimited Horizons, hung on the screen like a bad joke nobody wanted to acknowledge. The room was silent except for the whisper of Robert Kim turning pages in what I recognized as my original risk assessment, somehow materialized on the Apex side of the table. Thank you, Mr. Hale, Margot said with the kind of politeness that could strip paint. This has been illuminating. Victor was already packing his laptop, movements sharp with barely contained fury. His fingers fumbled with the power cord, that expensive Rolex catching on the cable. I appreciate your time. We'll send follow-up materials addressing your specific concerns. That won't be necessary. Margot stood, a signal that the meeting was definitively over. We have everything we need. The Apex executives filed out with the practiced efficiency of people who'd just witnessed an execution and wanted to discuss it privately. Linda Torres paused beside me, her voice low. Your original work? I nodded once. Thought so. She continued past, but I caught her slight smile. The ride back to Gravesend and Locke was tomb silent. Victor sat in the front passenger seat, typing furiously on his phone. I could see his screen reflected in the window. He was already crafting his version of events, his narrative of triumph, despite minor resistance from risk-averse board members. At 12:23 p.m., we were back in our office. Victor stormed straight to his corner suite without a word. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, and waited. Sarah appeared at my shoulder. How bad was it? Hindenburg-level disaster, I murmured, pulling up my email. That bad? Marcus had materialized on my other side. Worse. He actually said opportunities without risk assessment are just opportunities, not obstacles. Marcus winced. Even I know that's backwards. Margot knew it too. I spent the next 2 hours completing routine work, the picture of professional calm. Around me, the office buzzed with normal Monday energy, deals being made, analyses being run, the machinery of corporate finance grinding forward. Nobody knew that one of our biggest contracts had just been torpedoed by our own CFO. At 2:51 p.m., my email chimed. From Victor Hale. To Gravesend and Locke Leadership Team, Apex Dynamics Board, CC, Emily Hart, Margaret Thornton. Subject, Apex Dynamics Presentation, Triumph, Despite Resistance. The subject line alone was a masterpiece of delusion. Dear all, I'm pleased to report that today's presentation to Apex Dynamics was received with great interest and engagement. As expected when presenting transformative strategies, we encountered some natural resistance from more conservative board members comfortable with status quo thinking. However, I'm confident that our growth-focused approach resonated with the forward-thinking members of their leadership. The extensive questions about minor operational details actually validate our core thesis, that Apex has been too focused on risk mitigation rather than expansion opportunities. Emily Hart's preliminary data work, while overly pessimistic, provided useful background that I was able to reframe into a more constructive narrative. Sometimes junior analysts need to see how raw data transforms into executive-level strategy. I'm confident Apex will recognize the value of our visionary approach versus getting mired in every potential problem. Growth requires courage, not caution. We'll follow up with refined projections this week. Best, Victor Hale. Chief Financial Officer Gravesend and Locke, I read it twice. Each word a fresh insult. Overly pessimistic. Junior analyst. Raw data transforms into executive-level strategy. He'd somehow convinced himself that the disaster had been a success. And worse, he was trying to drag me down as cover for his incompetence. Around the office, I could feel the email rippling through the leadership team, heads prairie-dogging over cubicle walls, the sudden burst of typing that meant private messages were flying. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah? Did he seriously just claim victory? Then another. From Marcus. Junior analyst, you've been here 8 years. But I didn't respond to any of them. I was waiting for something else. Someone else. At 2:54 p.m., exactly 3 minutes after Victor's email, it arrived. From Margot Ellis. To Apex Dynamics Board, Gravesend and Locke Leadership Team, CC, Emily Hart, Margaret Thornton, Victor Hale. Subject, RE, Apex Dynamics Presentation, Triumph Despite Resistance. 3 minutes. That's all it took for Margot to compose and deploy the professional equivalent of a nuclear weapon. Dear Mr. Hale, I feel compelled to provide clarity regarding today's presentation. As your characterization differs significantly from the Apex Board's perception, the natural resistance you reference was actually fundamental concern about the complete absence of risk mitigation strategies in your proposals. The minor operational details you mention include an imminent port strike that could cost us 2.3 millimeters per day, critical supplier financial instability that threatens 40% of our European operations, regulatory changes in 3 South American countries that could invalidate your expansion projections. These are not conservative thinking, but fiduciary responsibilities. Furthermore, I must correct your characterization of Ms. Hart's work. The risk assessment she provided directly to me 3 months ago, which you appear not to have reviewed, identified every issue that undermined your presentation today. Her analysis has already helped us avoid 2 major supply chain failures this quarter. To be clear, Apex Dynamics will not be proceeding with any strategies that ignore fundamental risk analysis in favor of courage over caution. We require partners who understand that growth and risk management are not mutually exclusive, but necessarily intertwined. I've attached Ms. Hart's original assessment for the full distribution list's reference. Please note the substantial difference between her thorough analysis and what was presented today. We'll be scheduling a follow-up meeting with Graveson and Locke's CEO to discuss how to proceed with the contract. Regards, Margot Ellis, Chief Financial Officer, Apex Dynamics. Attached, Hart, Risk Assessment, Complete, PDF, 23.4 MB. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that follows a sniper's shot, the moment when everyone processes that someone's head has just exploded. But the body hasn't hit the ground yet. My computer screen lit up with notifications. Direct messages, emails, texts. The corporate equivalent of rubbernecking at a car crash. But I didn't open any of them. I was watching Victor's office door, waiting. At 3:02 p.m., it flew open. Victor burst from his office like a man fleeing a burning building. His face had gone from tan to crimson to an unhealthy pale in the span of 8 minutes. The Tom Ford suit that had been his armor this morning now looked like an expensive straitjacket. He strode directly to my desk, his footsteps sharp enough to draw every eye in the office. The Rolex on his wrist caught the afternoon light one more time as he planted both hands on my desk, leaning in close enough that I could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. "You did this," he hissed, quiet enough that only I could hear. "You sabotaged me." I leaned back in my chair, maintaining eye contact with perfect calm. "I gave you exactly what you asked for, Victor. All the raw data, no interpretation. You knew I couldn't." He stopped himself, realizing he was about to admit his own incompetence. "Couldn't what?" I asked mildly. "Analyze data, understand risk frameworks, read Polish financial statements." I tilted my head slightly. "You said my analysis was overly pessimistic. Fear-based limitations. I believe you called it." His knuckles were white where they gripped my desk. Around us, the office had gone cemetery quiet, everyone pretending to work while obviously eavesdropping. "This isn't over," he said, straightening up. "I think Margot's email was pretty clear that it is," I replied. Before he could respond, Margaret Thornton's assistant appeared at his shoulder. "Mr. Hale? Ms. Thornton needs to see you immediately." The walk to the CEO's office was barely 50 feet, but Victor aged years with each step. I watched him go, then turned back to my computer. Margot's email had unleashed an avalanche of responses. The entire leadership team was in damage control mode, and my inbox was filling with variations of, "We always valued your thorough analysis," and "Let's discuss your future role in the account." But the one that mattered came at 3:18 p.m. From Margaret Thornton to all staff subject. Organizational update team. Effective immediately. Victor Hale is no longer with Graveson and Locke. We thank him for his brief contribution and wish him well in his future endeavors. Emily Hart will resume full leadership of the Apex Dynamics account, reporting directly to me. A formal announcement regarding her promotion to Senior Vice President of Risk Strategy will follow. We remain committed to the thorough, analytically rigorous approach that has made us Denver's premier financial consulting firm. Margaret Thornton, CEO, 24 minutes. That's all it had taken from Victor's triumphant email to his termination. 24 minutes for him to transform victory into unemployment. Sarah materialized at my desk with 2 cups of coffee and a grin she couldn't suppress. "Senior VP?" Apparently, I accepted the coffee, allowing myself the smallest smile. "He's still in there," Marcus reported from his vantage point near the CEO's suite. Security just showed up. Standard procedure for C-suite terminations. Immediate escort from the building. No time to delete files or copy client lists. Victor would leave with nothing but his personal items in a banker's box. His Rolex the only thing of value he'd take with him. At 3:31 p.m., the elevator dinged. Victor emerged from Margaret's office flanked by two security guards, carrying that pathetic banker's box. His face was blank, the kind of shocked emptiness that comes when reality hits faster than denial can mobilize. He had to walk past my desk to reach the elevator. For a moment, our eyes met. In his, I saw the full understanding of what had happened. He'd loaded the gun when he'd dismissed my analysis. He'd aimed it when he'd demanded raw data without context. He'd pulled the trigger with that self-congratulatory email. All I'd done was make sure everyone was watching when the bullet hit. "Emily," he said, stopping despite the security guard's hand on his elbow. "Victor." That email. You knew Margot would respond like that. "I knew Margot values thorough analysis over empty promises," I said evenly. "Just like you knew you were in over your head when you couldn't understand the data. The difference is, I did my job anyway." The security guard tugged his arm gently. The elevator was waiting, doors held open like the mouth of a corporate abyss. Victor took 2 steps, then turned back. "This won't look good on my resume." "Neither did lying about your capabilities," I replied. "But I'm sure you'll spin it into something. Transformative opportunities, visionary resistance, something like that." The elevator doors started to close. In that last second, his mask finally cracked completely. "I had everything," he said. "The position, the salary, the arrogance to think you could fake expertise," I finished. "Reply all, Victor." You replied all. The doors closed with a soft whisper, taking Victor Hale and his $64 million disaster down 42 floors and out of our lives forever. The aftermath rippled through Graveson and Locke like an earthquake's aftershocks. Within minutes of the elevator doors closing on Victor's departure, the office erupted in barely contained chaos. Phones rang incessantly. Internal messages flew across screens, and the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the halls as department heads scrambled to assess the damage. I remained at my desk, an island of calm in the storm. My phone buzzed continuously. Clients, colleagues, competitors who'd somehow already heard. The corporate gossip network operated at light speed when a CFO got terminated in under half an hour. At 3:45 p.m., Margaret Thornton appeared at my desk personally. The CEO visiting a senior analyst's cubicle was unprecedented. She had people for that. But there she stood, her expression unreadable. "Walk with me, Emily." We headed to her corner office, passing clusters of employees who tried not to stare. Margaret closed the door behind us and gestured to the leather chairs facing her desk. "Margot Ellis called me directly after sending that email," she began. She was exceptionally clear about her position. Apex was prepared to pull the entire contract if Victor remained on the account. I had no idea she would. "Yes, you did." Margaret's interruption was soft but firm. "You knew exactly what would happen when Victor sent that email claiming victory. You knew Margot well enough to predict her response down to the minute." I met her gaze steadily. "I gave Victor every opportunity to review the actual analysis. He chose not to. And you chose not to warn him about the Polish supplier's financial irregularities, or the permit issues in Chile, or the labor negotiations in Peru." Margaret leaned back, studying me. "You let him walk into that boardroom with a loaded gun pointed at his own foot." "I gave him all the data he requested," I said carefully. "He specifically said he didn't want my interpretation." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. "Margot also said something else. She said you're the only analyst she's ever met who understands that sometimes the best strategy is letting incompetence reveal itself." She stood, moving to the window that overlooked downtown Denver. "Victor came highly recommended from New York. His credentials were impeccable. But credentials aren't competence, are they?" "No, ma'am." The senior VP position isn't just about the Apex account, she continued. I need someone who can identify risks not just in markets and supply chains, but in people. Someone who can play the long game when necessary. She turned back to me. Someone who can turn a reply all into a $64 million contract renewal. Renewal? Margot wants to expand the engagement. Specifically, she wants you leading a comprehensive audit of all their supplier relationships. The contract value increases by 30%. Margaret returned to her desk, pulling out a folder. Your new compensation package. The promotion is effective immediately, but I wanted you to see the numbers before the announcement goes wide. I opened the folder. The number at the top made my poker face crack for just a second. That's generous. That's market rate for someone who just saved our largest client contract and exposed a liability in senior management in the same afternoon. Margaret's expression grew serious. But Emily, let me be crystal clear about something. What happened today was justified. Victor was incompetent and arrogant, a dangerous combination. But if you ever play these games with someone who doesn't deserve it, we'll be having a very different conversation. Understood? Good. Now, I need you to call Margot and smooth any remaining feathers. Then prepare a presentation for the board tomorrow, explaining how we're restructuring the Apex relationship. And Emily? She paused as I stood to leave. Next time someone tries to steamroll you in a meeting, don't wait for them to self-destruct. Handle it directly. You've earned that right. I returned to my desk to find it transformed. The facilities team was already there, packing my belongings into boxes marked for the 40th floor, senior management territory. Sarah and Marcus stood nearby, grinning like kids on Christmas morning. So, boss, Sarah said, emphasizing the title. Do we call you ma'am now? You call me Emily, and you get back to work, I replied, but I was smiling. We have a client to retain and an audit to plan. As they scattered, I pulled up my email one more time. Among the hundreds of messages was one that stood out. From Victor Hale, personal email. To Emily Hart. Subject, no subject. Emily. By the time you read this, I'll be on a flight back to New York. I wanted to say something, though I'm not entirely sure what. I underestimated you. That's on me. But you could have warned me. A word, a hint, anything. We both know what you did was calculated. But I suppose that's the game, isn't it? Good luck with Apex. V.P.S. That reply. All really was my own stupidity. I'll give you that. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. Victor was already part of Graveson and Locke's past, a cautionary tale that would be whispered about at corporate happy hours for years to come. My computer pinged with a meeting invitation from Margaret. Board presentation, Apex Strategic Restructuring, 8 a.m. tomorrow. 24 hours ago. I'd been preparing to present my analysis to leadership, only to be humiliated and demoted to PowerPoint assistant. Now I was Senior Vice President of Risk Strategy, with a compensation package that would make Victor weep into his overpriced whiskey. The sun was setting over the Rockies, painting the office in shades of gold and amber. The 42nd floor was quieting as people headed home, but I had hours of work ahead. Calls to make, presentations to build, a team to reassure. But first, I pulled up a blank email and typed in Margot's address. Subject. Thank you, Margot. Your timing remains, as always, impeccable. Dinner next week, I'm buying. I believe I can afford it now. Emily. Her response came immediately. Emily, I never doubted you would. Tuesday, 7 p.m., Elways. And yes, you're definitely buying. Welcome to the senior ranks. You've earned it. M.P.S. 24 minutes from his email to his termination. I've seen hostile takeovers that took longer. The board presentation Tuesday morning was flawless. By noon, the news had spread through Denver's financial district like wildfire. By close of business, I had 3 headhunter calls and a dinner invitation from the CEO of our biggest competitor. I turned them all down. 6 months later, I was standing in the same conference room A where Victor had first humiliated me, but this time, I was running the meeting. The Apex contract had not only renewed but expanded into 3 new verticals. My team had grown from 6 to 25. The corner office on the 40th floor had my name on the door: Emily Hart, Senior Vice President, Risk Strategy. Sarah knocked and entered with a tablet. "You need to see this." It was a LinkedIn post, Victor Hale, announcing his new position as CFO of a startup in Manhattan. The company name was unfamiliar, the kind of venture that burns through investor money and disappears in 18 months. His post was full of the usual corporate speak. Excited for this transformative opportunity. Building something revolutionary. Lessons learned make us stronger. "Should we send a congratulations?" Sarah asked, her tone suggesting she'd rather send anthrax. "No," I said, handing back the tablet. "We don't look backward." But privately, I wondered if Victor had learned the most important lesson of all. Competence can't be faked. Arrogance is not authority. And in the digital age, reply all is the most dangerous button in corporate America. A year after that day, Margot Ellis retired from Apex, but not before ensuring I was on the short list for her replacement. I didn't take it. Graveson and Locke had made me a partner by then, the youngest in the firm's history. But the offer itself was victory enough. Sometimes, late at night when I'm reviewing risk assessments, I think about those 24 minutes. How a career built on bluff and bluster had collapsed faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. How a single email had become a $64 million bullet, fired by the very person it destroyed. The truth about corporate revenge is this: you don't always have to orchestrate someone's downfall. Sometimes, you just have to hand them the rope and know they'll fashion their own noose. Victor had tied his with a reply all button and hung himself with his own arrogance. My office phone rang. Another client, another contract, another risk to assess. I answered it with the same calm professionalism that had carried me through that infamous Monday. But on my desk, in a small frame that visitors couldn't see, I kept a printed copy of Victor's email, the one claiming triumph despite resistance, the one that started the 24-minute countdown to his professional extinction. It wasn't there to gloat. It was a reminder. A reminder that in corporate warfare, the most devastating wounds are often self-inflicted, that hubris is a luxury no one can afford. That data without context is like a gun without a safety, dangerous primarily to the person holding it, and most importantly, that sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't elaborate or complex. Sometimes it's as simple as letting someone announce their own ignorance to everyone who matters, then standing back while consequences arrive at the speed of email. Victor Hale thought he'd put me in my place with public humiliation and demotion to PowerPoint assistant. Instead, he'd handed me the opportunity to demonstrate the difference between real expertise and expensive suits, between actual analysis and pretty slides, between competence and confidence. 24 minutes. That's all it took for him to go from victor to victim of his own reply all. And me? I went from the analyst he'd dismissed to the senior VP who took his office. They offered to let me have his old furniture, including the desk where he'd written that fatal email. I had it removed. Success doesn't need to sit in failure's chair. But I kept the timestamp from his email, 2:51 p.m., as the password to my computer. A small private reminder that careers can end in the time it takes to grab afternoon coffee. That every email is a potential weapon. That reply. All should come with a warning label. Most of all, it reminds me that I didn't destroy Victor Hale. He destroyed himself. I just made sure everyone important was watching when he pulled the trigger. And in corporate America, that's the kind of revenge that pays dividends, literally, in my case, to the tune of $64 million, and counting. The sun sets over Denver's skyline outside my 40th floor window, painting the mountains gold just like it did that morning 3 years ago when I thought I was walking into my biggest presentation. Instead, I'd walked into my biggest opportunity. All because one man couldn't resist hitting reply all. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate revenge and the dangers of reply all. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of office justice, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed a spectacular professional self-destruction? Or maybe you have your own revenge story. Let me know in the comments. I read every single one.